If she had taken one step slower, her life would have stayed ordinary. Emily Carter had been counting tips in her head when it happened. $32.75, not enough for rent, not enough for anything, just enough to keep going one more day. Her feet ached inside cheap black heels, her hands trembling from her second shift, and the low hum of the restaurant pressed against her skull. Crystal Hall wasn't a place for people like her. It was a place where men wore suits worth more than her yearly income, and women laughed like they had never worried about a bill in their lives. But tonight felt different, colder the moment they walked in. 5 of them, silent, elegant, wrong, the kind of wrong you felt in your bones. Not your eyes, don't stare. Her manager had whispered, don't speak unless spoken to, and whatever you do, don't make a mistake. Emily nodded like she always did, because mistakes meant losing this job, and losing this job meant losing everything. She adjusted her tray and moved forward step by step, steady, careful, and visible, until someone bumped into her hard from behind, not enough to knock her down, just enough to throw her balance off the tray. Tilted glasses rattled, and then the world flipped in a single heartbeat. She fell forward, not onto the floor, not into the table, but onto him, onto the one person in the room no one dared to touch. Her knees hit first, then her hands pressed against his chest, solid, unmoving, warm in a way that didn't make sense, and suddenly the noise vanished. Conversations cut mid-sentence, forks froze mid-air, even the music seemed to choke and die. Emily's breath caught halfway out as she realized exactly where she was sitting. She tried to move instantly. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to, but before she could stand, a hand closed around her wrist, firm, unyielding, not painful, not gentle, just there like iron wrapped in silk. Her eyes lifted slowly, meeting his, and everything inside her stilled. He looked human at first glance, dark hair, sharp cheekbones, a face carved too perfectly to be real, but his eyes, those weren't human, pale silver with something deeper burning underneath, something old, something that had seen too much and forgotten. Nothing, you're shaking, he said, his voice low, quiet, yet it carried across the entire room like a command. Emily swallowed hard, realizing everyone was watching, every single person frozen, waiting for something she didn't understand. I need to get up, she whispered, but his grip didn't loosen, not even a fraction around them. Panic started to ripple, her manager rushing forward, pale as death. Sir, please. She didn't know what she was doing. Let her go. But the man didn't even glance in his direction. His attention never left Emily, like she was the only thing that existed. You fell, he said almost thoughtfully, as if analyzing her, not accusing, not angry, just curious, and that terrified her more than anything, because men like him didn't get curious about people like her. Her heart pounded harder, louder, like it was trying to escape her chest, and for a second, she swore he could hear it, feel it, track it, because his eyes flicked down to where her hand still rested against him, and something shifted. The air changed, colder, heavier, charged. Then Emily felt it, a strange warmth spreading from her wrist, creeping under her skin. She gasped softly, instinctively pulling back, but his grip tightened just enough to stop her. Don't move, he murmured, sharper now, and she froze completely as a faint glow flickered beneath her skin, gold, delicate, forming lines. She didn't understand his breath, caught, barely noticeable, but real. Impossible, he whispered, and for the first time something cracked in his composure, something dangerously close to disbelief. The room erupted, then voices overlapping, fear, confusion, orders being shouted, but none of it mattered because he leaned closer, his face inches from hers, his voice dropping to something meant only for her. Do you have any idea what you just did to me? And Emily realized with terrifying clarity that whatever answer he was waiting for would decide whether she ever walked out of this place again. Emily could not answer because her throat had gone dry, and the words would not form, not when his eyes were still locked on hers, not when that strange golden light pulsed faintly beneath her skin, like something waking up for the first time. I do not understand, she finally managed, her voice barely more than a breath. But he heard it, of course he heard everything. His gaze sharpened, studying her face like he was searching for something buried beneath the surface, something impossible. The noise around them kept rising, chairs scraping, hurried footsteps, her manager's voice breaking through again. Sir, please, you are drawing attention. But the man did not even blink, his hand still wrapped around her wrist, steady, grounding, terrifyingly certain. Then slowly, deliberately, he stood, and the movement alone shifted the entire room, because when he rose she realized just how tall he was, how the space seemed to adjust around him like it belonged to him, like everything did. Emily stumbled slightly, still caught in his hold, and for a brief second, she thought he would let go, but he did not. Instead, his fingers adjusted, tightening, just enough to guide her to her feet, beside him, not away from him, never away. Stay, he said softly, And it was not a request, something in the tone, something ancient and absolute pressed against her instincts, telling her to obey before she even realized she had stopped trying to pull free. Across the room, people were backing away, not just giving space, but retreating like a tide, pulling from shore. No one wanted to be close, no one wanted to be involved. Who is she? A woman whispered near the bar, her voice trembling. Why is he reacting like this? I do not know, someone else answered. But that mark, look at her wrist. Emily followed their gaze, her breath catching as she saw it clearly, now faint lines of gold weaving beneath her skin, forming a pattern she did not recognize, delicate but undeniable, and it was spreading, not fast, not violently, just enough to feel real, enough to make her heart race harder. This has to be some kind of reaction, she said quickly, panic creeping into her voice. Maybe I am allergic to something, maybe I touched something I should not have. But even as she spoke, she knew how wrong it sounded, because nothing about this felt like an accident, and the way he was looking at her confirmed it. No, he said quietly, his voice cutting through her words with unsettling certainty. This is not random. His thumb brushed lightly against her wrist, just above the glowing lines, and the contact sent a strange warmth through her arm, not painful, not overwhelming, just present, like a connection snapping into place. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. And for the first time she saw something behind his control, not anger, not cruelty, something closer to recognition, which made it worse, because recognition meant this had happened before, or at least it had been expected. You should not be here, he murmured, more to himself than to her. And then his eyes lifted, scanning the room sharply, as if calculating, as if measuring threats that she could not even see. We need to leave, he said suddenly, and this time it was directed at her. Emily blinked. Leave? I cannot just leave. I am working. I will get fired. But the faintest flicker of something crossed his expression, almost like disbelief that such a concern could matter. Right now you are past that point, he said calmly, as if stating a fact, not a threat. And before she could respond, before she could argue, the lights above flickered once, twice, and the atmosphere shifted again, heavier, colder, charged with something unseen. Conversations stopped completely now, replaced with a tense silence that pressed in from all sides, and somewhere in that silence someone whispered. They felt it too. Emily did not understand what they meant, but the way his grip on her wrist tightened just slightly told her everything she needed to know. Whatever had started between them was not finished, not even close. And as he guided her toward the exit without releasing her for even a second, she realized with a sinking certainty that walking out of this room was not escape. It was only the beginning. The moment they stepped outside the restaurant, the air changed completely, colder, sharper, like the night itself had been waiting for them. Emily barely had time to process the sudden silence before the doors shut behind them, sealing off the world. She knew, leaving her standing under dim city lights with a man she did not understand, and a mark still glowing faintly beneath her skin. You are hurting me, she said instinctively, even though his grip was not painful, just unbreakable. He looked down at their joined hands as if noticing it for the first time, then loosened his hold slightly, but did not let go, not completely, not enough for her to walk away. You can try, he said quietly, almost like he was testing her. Emily hesitated, her heart racing again, as she slowly pulled her wrist back, expecting resistance, expecting him to stop her. But for a brief second there was none, and hope flickered. She stepped back once, then twice, the distance between them stretching thin, fragile, and then it happened. A sharp, invisible pull snapped through her chest, not physical, not visible, but undeniable, like something inside her refused the separation. Her breath caught as her body stilled against her, while her feet, refusing to take another step. The faint gold beneath her skin pulsed once brighter this time, and his expression darkened, not with anger, but with certainty. There it is, he murmured, as if confirming something he had already suspected. Emily shook her head, panic rising. No, that is not normal, that is not possible. I do not even know you. But he took one step forward, closing the distance effortlessly. You know enough, he said, and there was something in his tone, something final, that made her stomach drop. Behind them the city moved as usual, cars passing, distant voices drifting through the night, completely unaware of what was happening just a few feet away, and that made it worse, because it meant no one was coming, no one would interrupt this, no one could explain it to her. What is happening to me? She asked, her voice breaking slightly, because the calm she had been forcing was slipping fast. His gaze softened, just a fraction, not kind, not gentle, but less sharp, as if he was measuring his words carefully. Something that should not exist has found you, he said slowly, and the way he said it made it sound less like an explanation and more like a warning. Emily let out a shaky breath. This is insane. I am just a waitress. I work double shifts. I barely make rent. Things like this do not happen to people like me. Something flickered in his eyes again. That same strange recognition from before. That is exactly why it matters, he replied, and she did not understand what that meant, not fully, but she felt the weight of it pressing down on her. Anyway, suddenly headlights swept across the street, and a sleek black car pulled up beside them, silent and precise. The door opened before the engine even fully stopped, as if whoever was inside already knew where to be. A man stepped out, tall, composed, his gaze immediately locking onto Emily's wrist, then shifting to the man beside her, his expression tightening. "My lord," he said carefully, "there is movement already." The word movement sent a chill through the air, and Emily felt it again, that subtle shift, like the night itself was reacting to something unseen. "We need to go now," the man continued, lower this time, urgent but controlled. Emily looked between them, confusion spiking. Movement of what? What does that even mean? But neither of them answered her directly. Instead, the man beside her turned slightly, positioning himself between her and the street without breaking contact with her gaze. "They can feel it," he said quietly, and that was the moment everything inside her dropped. Not just fear, not just confusion, but the realization that whatever this was, it was bigger than her, bigger than this city, bigger than anything she had ever known. "Feel what?" she asked, barely above a whisper. His eyes held hers steady, unblinking. "You." And for the first time, Emily understood that whatever had awakened inside her was not just drawing him in, it was calling something else, something out there in the dark, and whatever it was already on its way. Emily did not move, because something in his voice told her that running would not change anything. And the longer she stood there, the more she felt it, that strange pull beneath her skin, growing stronger, not painful, not overwhelming, just present, like a thread tightening between her and something unseen, something waiting. The man by the car opened the rear door fully, now stepping back with controlled urgency. "My lord, we cannot delay," he said again, his eyes flicking briefly toward the shadows lining the street, as if expecting them to move, as if expecting something to step out of them at any second. Emily followed his gaze instinctively, but saw nothing, just empty sidewalks, dim lights, and the distant hum of traffic. "This is crazy," she whispered, more to herself than to them, because none of this made sense, none of it felt real, until the man beside her shifted closer, his presence steady, grounding, and yet impossible to ignore. "Get in," he said quietly, and it was not a command spoken loudly, but it carried weight, something in the air bending around it. Emily hesitated, her instincts screaming at her that getting into that car meant crossing a line she could never uncross. "I cannot just leave. I have a life. I have responsibilities. I have a job." But even as she said it, the words felt smaller, weaker compared to the gravity of what was happening around her. "Your life changed the moment you touched me," he replied calmly, and there was no arrogance in his tone, no threat, just certainty, and that frightened her more than anything, because he believed it completely. The faint glow on her wrist pulsed again, slightly brighter now, and this time she felt it spread, a subtle warmth traveling up her arm, like something searching, like something awakening. Her breath hitched as she instinctively clutched her wrist. "What is this?" she asked again, her voice unsteady. The man by the car stiffened, his expression tightening as he looked directly at the mark, then back to his lord. "It is accelerating," he said, low, urgent. That word again, accelerating, like this was something measurable, something known. Emily shook her head, stepping back again. But the same invisible resistance stopped her, just as before, her body refusing to put distance between them. Panic surged through her chest. "I cannot even walk away," she said, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself, because the way both men reacted, instantly still controlled, but sharper, told her that losing control would not help. "You are not being held," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are being called." The word settled over her, heavy and impossible to ignore. Called by what she demanded, because she needed answers, she needed something solid to hold on to. But instead of answering immediately, he looked past her again, scanning the street, the rooftops, the dark spaces between buildings, and for the first time, she saw it clearly, the tension beneath his calm, the awareness, the readiness, like he was anticipating something approaching, something dangerous enough to concern him, which made her stomach drop even further. "They are closer now," the man by the car said, his voice lower than before, almost a warning. Emily turned quickly, her heart pounding, as she followed his line of sight again, and this time she felt it, not saw it, but felt it, a shift in the air, like a pressure change before a storm, like the night itself was leaning and watching, waiting, her breath Caught as a cold chill ran down her spine. What is coming, she whispered, but neither of them answered directly. Instead, he reached for her hand again, his fingers closing around hers, with that same steady certainty, and this time, she did not resist, because deep down she knew resisting had never been an option from the moment this started. From the moment she fell into his world. Get in, he said again, softer now, but with urgency threading through his tone. And this time, she listened, stepping toward the open car door, because whatever was out there in the dark, whatever was being drawn to her, she had the sudden, terrifying certainty that staying here would be far worse than going with him. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded far too final, and the moment Emily sat inside the car, the outside world seemed to disappear completely. The noise, the lights, the normal life she had been clinging to, all of it faded into something distant, unreal, like a memory she could not quite hold on to. The interior was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against her ears as the engine started without a sound, and the car began to move smoothly down the street. She did not remember fastening her seatbelt. She did not remember deciding to stay. She only knew that she had not tried to leave again, and that terrified her more than anything. Why am I not fighting this? She asked, suddenly her voice sharper now as she turned toward him, sitting beside her, his presence filling the space without effort. You are, he replied calmly. And when she frowned, he added, just not in the way you think. Emily shook her head, gripping her hands together tightly in her lap, as if grounding herself. This is not normal. People do not just get into cars with strangers because they tell them to. His gaze shifted to her, then steady, unreadable. I did not tell you, he said quietly. I gave you a choice. She almost laughed at that, a short, breathless sound, because it did not feel like a choice. It felt like something deeper. Something pulling her forward step by step, without asking permission. The mark on her wrist pulsed again, warmer this time, more noticeable, and she instinctively rubbed at it as if she could erase it. What is this? She demanded again, because the question had not changed, only the urgency had grown. Beside them, the man from earlier, now in the front seat, glanced back briefly, his expression still controlled, but tighter than before. We will have answers when we arrive, he said respectfully, but there was something in his tone, something cautious, like he was choosing his words carefully. Around the man beside her, Emily followed his glance, noticing the subtle shift in hierarchy, the way even his voice carried deference. That was when it clicked, not fully, not completely, but enough. The way everyone reacted, the way the room had frozen, the way this man spoke to him, not like an equal, not even like an employer, something more ancient, more absolute. You are not just some customer, she said slowly, her voice quieter, now more uncertain than before. His gaze remained on her for a long second, then he turned to the window, the passing lights reflecting faintly in his eyes. No, he said simply, and that single word carried more weight than any explanation could have. Emily swallowed hard, the realization settling deeper into her chest. Then who are you? She pressed, because she needed to hear it. She needed something real, something she could understand. But instead of answering immediately, he studied her again, his attention dropping briefly to her wrist, where the golden pattern had grown slightly more defined, thin lines curving into shapes that looked almost deliberate, almost like a symbol. You will understand soon enough, he said finally, and the calm certainty in his tone made her chest tighten again, because it sounded like something inevitable, not optional, something already set in motion. The car turned sharply, then leaving the familiar streets behind, the buildings growing taller, darker, more isolated, the city shifting into something quieter, more controlled. Emily glanced out the window, trying to track where they were going, but the route felt unfamiliar, like they had crossed into a part of the city she had never seen before. Where are we going? She asked, her voice softer now, not because she was calmer, but because something in the atmosphere demanded it. Home, he replied without hesitation, and that single word sent a strange chill through her, because it did not sound like her home. It did not even sound like a place. It sounded like a claim. The car slowed as they approached a set of tall iron gates that opened without hesitation, as if expecting them, as if they had been watching all along. Emily's breath caught as the vehicle passed through, revealing a vast estate hidden behind the walls, dark stone rising against the night, elegant and imposing in a way that made her feel suddenly very small. This is where you live? She asked quietly, unable to hide the disbelief in her voice, but he did not answer her directly. Instead, his gaze remained fixed ahead, his expression unreadable as the car came to a smooth stop. And before she could ask another question, before she could process what was happening, the door beside her opened, and cool night air rushed in, carrying with it that same strange feeling from earlier, that same awareness that something had followed them, something unseen, something waiting, and as he stepped out first, then turned slightly, extending his hand toward her, Emily realized with a sinking certainty that entering this place would not just change her life, it would reveal a truth she was not ready to face. Emily hesitated only for a fraction of a second before placing her hand in his, because something in her chest tightened the moment. She considered refusing, not fear, not pressure, something deeper, something that felt almost like instinct. His fingers closed around her, steady and certain, and as she stepped out of the car, the ground beneath her feet felt different, solid but unfamiliar, like she had crossed into a place that did not follow the same rules. The estate stretched out before her, tall stone walls, ivy climbing across the surface, windows glowing faintly with warm light that did not quite reach the darkness surrounding it. Everything about it felt old, not abandoned, not forgotten, just old in a way that carried weight, like it had stood there long before she was born and would remain long after she was gone. This is not normal, she said quietly, more to herself than to him, as her eyes moved across the structure, trying to take it all in. You keep saying that, he replied without looking at her, and there was something almost dry in his tone, as if the concept of normal had never meant much to him. Emily frowned slightly, but did not argue, because arguing felt pointless right now. Nothing about this situation listened to logic. The large doors at the entrance opened before they reached them, without anyone touching them, and that alone sent a chill down her spine, as warm light spilled out onto the stone steps, illuminating the path ahead. Inside, the air was warmer, but heavier, like the walls themselves held something unseen, something that watched, something that remembered. Her steps slowed instinctively as she crossed the threshold, her senses sharpening, every sound, every movement amplified in a way she could not explain. The faint echo of her heels against the polished floor, the soft rustle of fabric somewhere deeper inside, the distant flicker of candlelight reflected against dark wood and marble. It felt less like entering a home, and more like stepping into a place where rules had already been written long before she arrived. Stay close, he said quietly, and she realized then that at some point his hand had not left hers, not even once. She swallowed, but nodded anyway, because staying close felt safer than wandering into whatever this place truly was. They moved through a long corridor lined with tall windows and portraits, figures staring down from the walls, their expressions unreadable, their eyes seeming to follow her. As she passed, Emily glanced at them quickly, then away, her pulse quickening again. Who are they, she asked, unable to stop herself. Ancestors, he replied simply, and that single word made something shift in her chest again, because it was not just a family home, it was something older, something rooted in history, something she did not belong to. Her gaze dropped briefly to their joined hands again, then to her wrist where the golden mark had grown clearer, now the lines more defined, forming a pattern that felt intentional, like a symbol waiting to be understood. It pulsed once softly, and she inhaled sharply at the sensation. It is stronger, she said quietly, almost to herself. He stopped, then turning to face her fully, his expression sharpening as his eyes focused on the mark. Show me, he said, and though the words were calm, there was urgency beneath them. Emily hesitated only for a moment before lifting her hand, the glow faint but unmistakable, now tracing along her skin. His gaze darkened slightly as he studied it, not confused, not surprised, but calculating, as if he was putting pieces together in real time. This should not be possible, he murmured, more to himself than to her. Again, that word impossible, it echoed in her mind louder each time he said it, because whatever this was, whatever she had triggered, it was not something he expected, not something he controlled. A sudden movement at the far end of the corridor caught her attention, figures emerging from the shadows, stepping into the light one by one, dressed in dark formal clothing, their presence silent but unmistakably aware of her, of them. Emily instinctively took a small step closer to him, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. His hand tightened slightly around hers, not to restrain, but to steady, as his gaze lifted, meeting the approaching figures. Without hesitation, my lord, one of them spoke, bowing their head slightly, but their eyes flicked toward Emily almost immediately, and in that single glance she saw it. Recognition, not of her, but of what she carried. The mark is active, another voice said, quieter but no less intense, and the words sent a ripple through the group. Emily's breath caught as she felt the weight of their attention settle on her fully, now not curious, not welcoming, something else, something far more serious. What does that mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but no one answered her directly. Instead, they all looked at him, waiting for his response, for his decision, and in that moment Emily realized with a cold clarity that whatever happened next would not be her choice, it would be as no one spoke for 3 full seconds, and in that silence, Emily felt that the weight of their attention pressing down on her, not just curiosity, not just concern, something far heavier, something that made her chest tighten. Without warning, then he stepped forward just slightly enough to shift the entire room, without raising his voice, without making a single sharp movement. And yet everything changed. She stays, he said, and the words landed with quiet finality, like a decision already made. The figures at the end of the corridor exchanged brief glances, subtle but meaningful, their hesitation almost invisible to anyone who was not looking for it. But Emily saw it. She felt it. They were not questioning her, they were questioning him. My lord. One of them spoke, carefully, his tone controlled, but edged with caution. The mark is not stable. We cannot predict what it will do. That word again, stable, like she was something uncertain, something dangerous. Emily instinctively pulled her hand back slightly, but his grip tightened just enough to stop her, not forceful, not harsh, just enough to remind her that she was not standing alone here. It will stabilize, he replied calmly, his gaze never leaving theirs, as if daring them to challenge him. And for a moment no one did. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting, measuring. Then another voice spoke, softer, older. We have not seen this in centuries. The consequences are unknown. Emily's heart skipped at that. Centuries. The word echoed louder than it should have, and for the first time, she understood just how far out of her depth she was. She was not just in a different place, she was in a different world entirely. I am right here, she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension sharper than she intended, and all eyes turned to her instantly. Because I would really like to know what you are talking about. What mark? What consequences? What is happening to me? The words came out faster now, fueled by fear, by confusion, by the growing realization that no one planned to explain anything unless she forced them to. He looked down at her then, and for a brief second something shifted in his expression, not annoyance, not frustration, something closer to consideration, like he was deciding how much to tell her, how much she could handle. You formed a bond, he said finally, his voice lower now, quieter, but no less steady. A bond that should not exist between. What? She pressed immediately, because that was not enough. It was not even close enough. His gaze held hers for a long moment, and then he answered, between you and me. The simplicity of it did not make it easier to understand, it made it worse. Emily blinked once, her mind struggling to catch up. That does not make any sense. I do not know you. I have never met you before. Tonight you sat on my lap, he replied, and there was something almost deliberate in the way he said it, like he was stating a fact that carried more weight than she realized. The contact triggered it. Emily shook her head quickly. That is ridiculous. People bump into each other all the time. That does not create whatever this is. Her voice wavered slightly at the end, because even she could hear how weak that argument sounded compared to everything she was feeling, compared to the mark still glowing faintly under her skin, compared to the way she could not walk away from him. No one moved in that moment, not the figures in the corridor, not the man beside her, not even the air itself. Then one of them spoke again, quieter this time, but with a note of urgency. My lord, if the others sense it, we will not be able to contain the situation. Emily's stomach dropped at that. The others, the same thing she had felt outside, the same unseen presence that had followed them here. Her gaze snapped back to him. What others? She asked, but he did not answer immediately. Instead, his eyes lifted again, scanning the corridor, the shadows beyond it, the unseen spaces of the estate, as if listening to something she could not hear, as if tracking something she could not feel. Yet they are already searching, he said quietly, and the certainty in his tone sent a cold wave through her chest. Emily's breath caught as she realized with sudden clarity that whatever had been drawn to her, whatever had been following them, it was not gone, it had simply not arrived yet. And when it did, everything would change. The silence that followed his words felt heavier than anything Emily had experienced before, not loud, not chaotic, just still in a way that made her pulse echo in her ears. They are already searching. The sentence repeated in her mind again and again, as if her thoughts were trying to catch up to a reality she was not ready to face. Searching for me? She asked quietly, because even saying it out loud made it feel impossible. His gaze returned to her immediately, steady, unwavering. Yes, he said, and there was no hesitation, no doubt, just certainty, the kind that made her stomach tighten. Because he was not guessing, he knew. Emily shook her head slightly, taking a small step back this time, without trying to break away from him, but simply to breathe, to think. This does not make sense. Why would anyone search for me? I am nobody. The faintest flicker crossed his expression at that word, nobody, as if he disagreed, as if the idea itself was incorrect. You are no longer nobody, he said calmly, and the weight of those words settled over her slowly, deeply changing something inside her. Before she could respond, a sudden shift moved through the corridor, subtle, but undeniable, like a ripple through still water. Every figure present reacted at once, not with panic, not with fear, but with awareness, their attention snapping toward the same direction, the far end of the hall, where shadows gathered thicker than before. Emily felt it too this time, not just a sense, not just a pressure, something sharper, something closer, like standing near an open door and feeling the cold from outside seep in. "What is that?" she whispered, instinctively stepping closer to him. Again, her body, reacting before her mind could catch up. His hand moved slightly, adjusting his hold on hers, not restraining, not forcing, just anchoring her where she stood. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, and there was a shift in his tone, now not louder, not harsher, just more defined, like a line had been drawn, and everything beyond it mattered more than before. The figures at the corridor's end moved quickly, but controlled, positioning themselves with silent precision, not blocking the path entirely, but narrowing it, creating space, shaping the room, without a single spoken command. Emily watched them, her breath shallow as the atmosphere tightened around her, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then from the shadows something changed, not visible, not fully formed, but present, a movement, without motion, a presence without shape, and yet everyone felt it. Emily's fingers tightened around his without realizing it, her heart racing faster, now louder, and for the first time, she understood what he meant earlier. This was not just about her, this was about something that had been waiting, something that had been drawn here by whatever was happening inside her. "It knows," he said softly, almost under his breath, and the words sent a sharp chill through her chest. "Knows what?" she asked, but her voice barely carried this time, because part of her already knew the answer. The mark on her wrist pulsed again, stronger than before, the golden lines brightening briefly before settling back into a faint glow, but it was enough to feel, enough to confirm that whatever this was, it was not hidden anymore. It had been found. One of the figures spoke low, urgent, "My lord, we must seal the corridor." But he did not move immediately, his gaze still fixed ahead, as if measuring, as if calculating. Then finally, he stepped forward, just slightly, placing himself fully between her and the far end of the hall, his posture calm, controlled, but unyielding. "No," he said quietly, and the refusal carried more weight than any raised voice ever could. "If we close it now, they will know exactly where to look." Emily's breath caught at that, because it meant this was only the beginning, not an attack, not a confrontation, but a signal. Something had been sent, something had been noticed, and now whatever existed beyond these walls was aware of her, aware of them, aware of the bond. She did not understand. Her fingers trembled slightly as she looked down at her wrist again. The glow, still faint, but steady now, like it had settled into place, like it belonged there. She lifted her gaze slowly back to him, her voice barely more than a whisper. "What happens when they find me?" He did not look at her immediately, his attention still fixed forward, his expression unreadable. But when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, low, and certain. "They already have." And for the first time, Emily realized that whatever was coming next, it was not something she could escape. It was something she had already become a part of. Emily felt the meaning of his words settle into her bones, slowly, heavily, like something irreversible. "They already have." It was not a warning, it was a statement, and the difference mattered more than anything. Her breath came slower, now not calmer, just quieter, like her body was trying to adjust to a reality that refused to make sense. Then from the far end of the corridor, the air shifted again, not stronger, not louder, but clearer, like whatever had been hidden in the shadows had stepped closer, not into view, but into awareness. Emily could feel it now distinctly, a presence pressing against the edges of the room, not physical, not visible, but undeniable, and it was focused on her. She did not need to be told. She knew. The mark on her wrist pulsed again, brighter this time, steady and controlled, no longer flickering, no longer uncertain, and with each pulse that invisible pressure responded, drawing tighter, sharper, like a connection locking into place. Her fingers trembled slightly as she instinctively tightened her grip on his hand. And this time, he did not adjust it, did not guide it. He simply held on, firm, steady, grounding, as if anchoring her against something far greater. "Do not react," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear, and she nodded instinctively, even though she did not trust herself to speak, because reacting felt impossible anyway. Her body was too focused on the sensation building around her. The figures in the corridor remained still, but alert, their attention fixed forward, their presence forming a silent barrier, not to stop what was coming, but to stand between it and her. The tension stretched thin across the space Like a wire pulled too tight, then a voice spoke not. From a person, not from a place, but from the air itself, calm, distant, and unmistakably aware you should not exist. The words were soft, almost thoughtful, but they carried through the corridor with perfect clarity, and Emily felt them rather than heard them, something in her chest tightening sharply in response. I did not do anything, she said before she could stop herself, her voice unsteady, but real, and for a moment the pressure shifted slightly, like whatever was there had turned its attention fully onto her. Interesting, the voice replied after a pause, and there was something almost curious in it now, something measured, as if she were being studied, not threatened, not attacked, just observed. He stepped slightly in front of her, then his posture unchanged, but more defined, his presence filling the space between her and the unseen speaker. She is under my protection, he said calmly, and there was no hesitation in his tone, no doubt, just quiet authority. The kind that did not need to be proven. The air stilled again for a long second, longer than before, and Emily could feel the weight of that statement, the way it settled into the space around them, the way it was being considered. Protection is irrelevant, the voice answered finally, and though it remained calm, there was something sharper beneath it, something that made her pulse spike again. The bond is active, it will draw attention, you cannot conceal it. Emily swallowed hard, her mind racing to keep up. Bond, attention, conceal, none of it sounded like something she could control, none of it sounded like something she could stop. Then what do you want, she asked quietly, because if they were already here, if they already knew, then there was no point pretending otherwise. The silence that followed stretched longer, this time heavier, as if the answer itself mattered more than the question. When it came, it was simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. We want to see what you become. Emily's breath caught at that, not because of the words themselves, but because of what they implied. Not an ending, not a threat, something else, something unfolding, something not yet decided. Beside her, his grip on her hand tightened slightly, not enough to hurt, not enough to restrain, just enough to remind her that she was not facing this alone. You will not come closer, he said quietly, and there was a subtle shift in his tone, now something firmer, something that did not invite negotiation. Another pause, longer this time, and then slowly the pressure began to ease, not disappearing, not retreating completely, just pulling back enough to release the tension in the room, like a tide receding after reaching its peak. The presence did not vanish, it simply withdrew, leaving behind a lingering awareness that it was still there, still watching, still waiting. Emily exhaled slowly, her body finally catching up to the moment as the corridor settled back into stillness, but nothing felt the same, not the air, not the walls, not even herself. She looked down at her wrist again, the golden mark, glowing faintly, steady, now no longer flickering, no longer uncertain. Then she looked up at him, her voice quiet but steady. What am I becoming? He did not answer immediately, his gaze still fixed ahead, as if listening, as if tracking something beyond her understanding, and when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, low and certain, something they had been waiting for, and that was when Emily realized that whatever this was, whatever she had stepped into, it was not just changing her, it was awakening something that the world had been waiting to see.